But it's very distressing when we see the surge in dementia and the inability to even get our hands around, notwithstanding the great work that people like Scripps and everybody else are trying to do, but we really don't have anything looming on the horizon.
David, getting back to those cuts for a second, what that really means, if I'm understanding this correct for our listeners out there, is that there's going to be an expectation that that care that needs to be given, such as changing dressings and whatever else might need to be done.
Right, post-acute home care.
Without training, is the expectation is that the caregiver is going to do this and know how to do it well.
Well, the caregiver is going to have to do this. The presumption that they can do it well with no training and no support, I think, is not realistic. And this has been an issue with caregiving for a while, is that the formal health care system has dumped on the unpaid family caregiver everything that they can't do. And I don't mean clinically, but I mean everything that they're getting out quicker and sicker, and what can't be done is being left to the family caregiver. And those are 50 to 60 million people that are out there kind of reinventing the wheel every week, being tasked with all kinds of responsibilities that they never expected, and expected, as you said, to do it properly.
And what of those that do not have someone else in the home? They live by themselves for whatever reason. Who now is going to come and do that after they've had surgery, for example?
Well, I had a woman this afternoon in one of my support groups who I hadn't seen her in a few weeks, and I guess it's been a month and a half. She'd lost 25 pounds.
Wow.
She had been through all kinds of clinical episodes, but she was convinced, because her husband, who has advanced dementia, still pretty much looked the same, and when he opened his mouth, he sounded the same. And so each time she was trying to work out something to put him in assisted living dementia, he would say, "No, I'm not going." And she would respond as though it were the old days when he said something, it meant something. And I spent a good half an hour with her after the support group was through, telling her that the way she looks and how her whole physicality as well as her physical well-being was affected, and emotionally she was so drained, so depressed. I said, "You're going to pass away before your husband, and what good is that going to do?" I said, "Now you're going to leave the decision-making to somebody else when you have an opportunity to do it. And I've known you now for a couple of years, and I've watched you delay and delay. And now if you look in a mirror, you'll see exactly what I told you, unfortunately, was going to happen the longer you kept him at home and you try and reason with him. It's just not there." And so while she agreed with me, I told her to call me tomorrow, because I was going to give her some suggestions on where she might place her husband, because this can't keep going the way it's going. And unfortunately, I see way too much of it. People just wait too long, and they take their loved one at face value. Even though they know they've got dementia, they look and sound like they always did, and they can always come out with an expression like no, or when the kids call on the phone, "Hi, how are you, Dad?" "Fine, here, talk to your mother." And it all sounds like it used to sound, and so everybody just kind of deals with it the old way.
I think that's going to be a repeat of the same conversation when we have our guest on later on. Same type of excuses being given.
Right. And, one other thing. There was an author by the name of Norton Handler who wrote a book called Rethinking Aging, and the book's tagline was "Growing Old and Living Well in an Overtreated Society." And this is a point we've been raising on numerous occasions, that it's not the survival of the fittest. We've kind of jumped over Darwin, and it's the survival of the best medicated. And that's not necessarily on the other side of all that treatment, leaving you with a quality of life and a condition that you would feel is acceptable, even though you survived whatever it is that you were suffering from. And a lot of people are going to have to make decisions like that when they have serious illness, if somebody pulls out all the stops for them and they manage to get them through the event, what are they looking forward to on the other side? And is it just to be alive? And I don't take anything away from anybody that feels that way. But if you're confined to bed and you're seriously ill and all they did was keep you alive, is that a quality of life? Is that what you expected, be young or old, on the other side of the
Highly
medical
unlikely.
treatment? Yeah. And he made a point that we're taught and marketed that all changes in appearance and function as we grow older are forms of disease that demand treatment. But growing old is not a disease. We change in many respects. Our bodies change, our brains change a little bit, and our genes are constantly, our cells are constantly turning over, and they've been programmed to age. And so we are simply what we would expect to be if we were realistic at age 65, 70, 75, and 80. And even if you want to tell yourself that 65 is the new 40, that's fine. However, when we lift up the hood on that car, there's still 65,000 miles on the engine.
Absolutely.
So, I know it's a matter of how you feel until your body tells you otherwise. But I think this is something that we all have to recognize, that there's normal aging and changes. All right? And it's gray hair and liver spots, and I know I have them.
And welcome to my world.
Right.
David, I wanted to remind our listeners that if they go to Caregiver Reality Facebook or Caregiver Reality LinkedIn page, you're going to find many provocative articles and discussions that are there, that some of which we do on the show, many of which we don't have time for. But please go on Facebook, like us, and offer your opinions, and let us know what you think.
Right. And that's important because, Paul and I, every week, we have an opportunity, because of the sophistication of IT and what the computers can do, to track our viewership. Our listenership is a little more difficult because it's hard to track who's listening on the radio. But our viewership is very heavily skewing towards men. Men are following this program possibly because Paul and I are both male caregivers. Men have a tendency to try and solve problems without necessarily asking for help. We may be a safe place to hear about caregiving without having to raise your hand and be recognized. But we're running almost 65-35 men to women in that age category of 44 to 65, and that's very different than what most people would have thought, that it would have been more women. But as we see more men coming into caregiving, and it's almost equal these days, 50-50. In the old days, it used to be a 42-year-old daughter taking care of a 70-year-old mother, all right? But now, it's much more, as we see aging in the workplace and a lot more spousal caregiving. Men are equal in terms of percentage to women. And they're behind the eight ball a little bit in that they may not be natural nurturers the way women are, and they're looking for help, but they don't want to raise their hand. And so possibly the reason we're seeing that is because we're a very safe place to listen.
Now, having said that, and knowing our demographics, I came across this little snippet in the AARP bulletin this month, and just take a second to read it.
Right.
And
is that the Old Testament or the New Testament?
But it says, deal breaker: an older couple is more likely to divorce if the wife gets seriously ill, but not if the husband does, a new study finds. University of Michigan researchers looked at 20 years of data on 2,717 marriages of couples age 50 and older. Even though more husbands fell ill during this time, there was significantly more divorces when the wife got sick. Now, our experiences tend to show just the opposite of that.
Right. Well, you and I.
I mean,
show-
from our demographics.
Right, and our demographics say that men do want to know, and you didn't need your wife's illness to decide that your marriage wasn't working. So it's
Good point.
And so I think we all have to look at what are some of the underlying reasons. And you're listening to us on CareGiverReality.com. We're here at WWNN 1470 AM, AMP2 TV, and iHeartRadio. So you're listening to us almost worldwide, and we know that because of the responses that we get on the site. And so I see we're coming up to a station break, and so let's go ahead and do that. When we come back, you're going to hear from a very special guest who's here in the studio with us. If you're watching, you can see him on the screen right now. And so let's go to that break.
CFC support helps fund research. You can too. Each year, thousands of men and women serving their country in the U.S. military, as well as other employees of the federal government and the U.S. Postal Service, provide support for medical research to find treatments and cures for diseases. This is done through the Combined Federal Campaign, an annual workplace giving campaign that allows eligible individuals to support charities, such as those that conduct medical research, through a payroll deduction. Money donated this way to the medical research charities and its member organizations helps fund research to fight diseases from Alzheimer's to cancer, multiple sclerosis, blindness, breathing disorders, and much more. The diseases included afflict people of all ages, from the very young to the very old. You don't need to be a member of the military or a federal government employee to support research to help you or those you love that are suffering from an illness or disease. Donations to our not-for-profit tax-exempt organizations are tax-deductible and provide a vital source of funding in the fight to defeat some of life's most dreaded diseases. Please visit the website of the Medical Research Charities, which can be found at medicalresearchcharities.org. That's all one word, medicalresearchcharities.org. On that website, you can learn more about our member charities and make a donation in support of the research they're conducting for a specific disease or family of diseases. You can make a donation to Medical Research Charities itself and support the work of all our member charities. Please visit our website today, medicalresearchcharities.org. Become a part of Joining Forces to Find a Cure. Are you a family caregiver? Are you taking care of a spouse or loved one who can no longer take care of himself or herself? Are you dealing with Alzheimer's disease and don't know what to do? Do you feel burned out, frustrated, and just don't know where to turn? You've tried doctors, lawyers, and mental health professionals and have come to realize that they don't have practical answers to these questions. What you need are experts, non-clinical family caregivers with 25 years of active experience helping thousands of family caregivers like yourself. People who can help you provide a better quality of life for yourself and your loved one. Who you need are David Levy or Paul Vadiato. Reach David at caregiverreality.com or reach Paul at caregiverreality.com and let them help you pick the right path towards improving the quality of life for you, the caregiver, and your loved one.
I am Paul Vadiato, president of CareGiver Reality and a full-time spousal caregiver. When I arrive at the office to begin my workday, my caregiving role doesn't get left outside the door. My day is often interrupted dealing with issues at home. That is time not focused on my job. I am but one of the 50 million unpaid family caregivers. Caregiving in the workplace is a costly productivity issue that is only going to increase as our workforce gets older. Caregiver-friendly firms retain hard-to-replace team members, tend to attract better talent, and get out in front of the productivity loss that exists everywhere. Now, new questions are being raised as to possible exposure to discrimination lawsuits as employees question whether their role as a caregiver is damaging them as promotions are denied or reprimands increase that might result in a termination. Caregiving in the workplace, left unaddressed, is costing your firm money, reputation, and possible litigation. CareGiver Reality brings education and training solutions to the workplace. Let our experienced team help evaluate your unique situation. contact me at paul@caregiverreality.com. That's paul@caregiverreality.com. Do it today.
This is Caregiver Reality with gerontologist David Levy and caregiver expert Paul Vadiato, who ask you to call in and speak with him on the air toll-free at 888-565-1470. That's 888-565-1470 to share a story or important information. Now, back to today's Caregiver Reality Show.
And we're back. And CaregiverReality.com. It's the Caregiver Reality Hour. You know, one of our sponsors that we collaborate with is the Medical Research Charities, and I always give them not only a big shout out because they're one of our sponsors, but because we feel very strongly that as an umbrella organization for a number of major research charities, that they're doing a heck of a job at a time when a lot of research that's should be coming from the NIH and other traditional sources isn't happening. So they're in there doing their job as best they can, and we always try and give one of their underlying research charities a bit of a shout out. And today it's one that affects a lot of people, and it's glaucoma. And the Glaucoma Research Foundation is dedicated to preventing vision loss from glaucoma by investing in innovative research, education, and support with the ultimate goal of finding a cure. The Glaucoma Research Foundation funds cutting-edge research around the world seeking new and better treatments for glaucoma, in addition to a cure for this devastating disease, the leading cause of preventable blindness in America. A catalyst for a cure, they are a major collaborative research effort redefining how glaucoma research is conducted and unique research models that are focused on one clear objective: finding a cure for glaucoma. And so if you want to know more about them, you can go to medicalresearchcharities.org. That's medicalresearchcharities.org, or you can go right to their website, www.glaucoma.org. That's www.glaucoma.org, and they are doing a wonderful job in trying to help a disease and affliction.
Good people.
Good people. And so not only is it good people, but today we have a special guest, Michael Herbert. And Paul, why don't you take it over and let's get started.
Yes, let's do it indeed. One of David's favorite expression is that caregiving is agnostic, in meaning that it matters not what the disease is, it matters not who you are, where you live, your circumstances, how much money you have. All diseases have caregivers. And we're going to focus this month on this whole issue of addiction, recovery, and family caregiving. And we have in-house an expert today, a good friend of mine I've known for many, many years. In way of an introduction, Michael Herbert has been working in the field of addiction for the past 25 years. He has worked in all phases of treatment, from intervention to aftercare. Michael is an addiction counselor, recovery coach, and group facilitator. And Michael has worked both nationally and internationally. And Michael, welcome to the show.
Well, I'm glad to be here. Thanks for having me, David and Paul.
All right. Well, it's our pleasure. And Paul?
Yeah.
Okay. Michael, some people make the assumption, we can call it judgments or stereotypes, and oftentimes the family caregiver is blamed as the enabler of why the person who is suffering from whatever addictive situation they may be in. And the professional community, there was that article in the Times, and I don't want to jump to that for the moment, but they're starting to take somewhat of a slightly different view that the family caregiver has a part to play, and maybe at times they are the reason. And certainly, because we were talking about this before the show started, there are many family members who would be in the role of caregiver that may have contributed to why somebody, especially a younger family member, might have turned to drugs or alcohol or some other addictive behavior. Could you get into that a little bit for us?
Well, I'd say in general, just a general statement, when the people around the addict changes or alcoholic changes, the alcoholic changes. And people just need to be doing things differently. I think family members do get a bad name at times and are kind of finger pointed at as being enablers, but they're doing the very best they can with what they have. And a lot of times the family members just don't know any better, and they're desperate to save their loved ones' lives. So they do crazy things like a mother or a father may go into a bad neighborhood and buy drugs for their son or daughter just to keep them from going through withdrawal. I knew a father that got a mattress and laid it down in front of his daughter's bedroom so she couldn't leave at night, and that's where he slept every night. He didn't know what else to do. These are the stories that they're telling me when they come into my office as a result of, really ignorance and lack of support around how to address the disease. People are desperate that their son, daughter, wife, husband will die if they don't. And there's so much shame and stigma around addiction. Why would someone openly talk about my son, daughter, wife, husband has a problem if their belief is they're going to be judged and criticized?
Right. Well, that's a problem that many caregivers, not necessarily in the field of, in the world of addiction, but especially in the world of Alzheimer's, just to make a quick segue with the A word, is that a lot of them are afraid that their friends will pull away, that they will be not criticized because, they didn't cause the disease, but people have very strange notions about Alzheimer's, and it can be a very lonely world because, once again, that caregiver, until they come and ask for help, doesn't know what to do. And I've seen caregivers, because their loved ones wander at night, do the same thing that you just described, literally put a mattress in front of the door so they know whether or not their loved one is getting up and trying either to go outside or doing whatever may be going on. So, as Paul said, all caregiving is kind of agnostic, and we can probably take some of those traits and trade them off into a number of other
Absolutely.
diseases.
Michael, just to roll back just a little bit, when we speak about addiction, when does addiction occur? What is addiction? What is an addicted person? How do we know that we've crossed that line?
Well, addiction in general, alcoholism, chemical dependency is a brain disease. And these drugs affect the brain, and they affect a part of the brain that overrides logic. Some people might say a person is born an addict. Some people say addiction is developed. If you look at a person who uses chemicals before the age of 15, that if there is physical abuse, sexual abuse, if culture says heavy drinking, those can be precursors to addiction, mental illness, if it's not addressed.
All right. So, in effect, you're drawing kind of a little bit of a line at 15 or before, and there also may be causative factors, as you said, such as sexual abuse,
Mental illness.
right?
And culture. If I come from a culture where there's heavy drinking or drug use, the likelihood my son or daughter, there's a higher chance.
Because you're exposed to it.
Because you're exposed to it, absolutely.
All right. And when you say that it's a brain disease, it's and I know that between the serotonins and the dopamines and other brain chemicals, that sometimes this alcohol and drug addiction or whatever it may be affects pleasure centers.
Absolutely.
And so the desire to have that pleasure or whatever it may be, that the high they get. All right. Stops normal thinking in terms of saying no or avoiding it. Would that be somewhat correct?
That's absolutely correct.
You mentioned mental health, Michael, and oftentimes you hear the phrase dual diagnosis when people are talking about recovery. Can you really define what that is, and how is that approached when somebody is seeking recovery?
Well, I'm going to say in a general term, dual diagnosis would be that the person has another problem other than drugs or alcohol, and that could be anxiety or depression. Some might look at it as a personality disorder. And usually what happens is a person who, let's say, is depressed or has an anxiety disorder, they're best served by getting a proper evaluation from a medical professional that not only understands psychiatric, but also understands addiction. Because there's lots of people that see medical professionals that aren't always savvy around addiction. If I am depressed and I use alcohol, marijuana, or opiates, and those are depressants, maybe that's why I'm depressed. You know, if you take those substances away from me, you can probably get a better diagnosis of what's going on with me as a result of them being out of my system.
Right, but does the medical profession typically see and aware of the circumstance until somebody has gotten themselves overboard?
I think some. I'm working with an individual right now who had an intervention 15 years ago, got clean and sober, got the master's degree, got a PhD, had some kind of trauma happen in their life, went to a doctor, didn't talk about their history of addiction, and has now been prescribed medication, which is bringing this person right back to where they started.
But now they have permission.
Now they have permission. So now they're justifying their use. And families are funny about this. The family members have told me, oh, but Michael, he's got ADD. That's why he's on that medication. And I reminded them, your son got a master's degree and a PhD without that medication, and now all of a sudden needs medication to get through the day. I don't think so. I don't think your son was honest with that professional about his addiction history, or that professional isn't educated and understand about addiction. And that can happen too. Just because you're a doctor doesn't necessarily mean you know all there is to know about addiction.
Right. Well, you know, we find that with a lot of other disciplines. Many times, if somebody comes in and, you know, appears to be forgetful, and they're seeing their general practitioner, sometimes it's a hip shot, you know, just to say, well, it's Alzheimer's, here's, you know, and that's it, without necessarily going to a neurologist or another neurospecialist to really find out what it is that's going on.
And I work with plenty of people who are in addiction treatment that go to their general practitioner for antidepressants and things like that, and that general practitioner may not be the best person to provide that for that person.
Right, and we're not general practitioner bashing, we're simply saying that medical professionals that have specialties or that are generalists don't necessarily have the span that covers all disciplines in the medical profession that they're not specialized in.
Yeah, and I would always seek out a specialist if I could. Yeah.
Michael, you spoke before about an intervention, and I guess we've all seen enough television shows where, you know, the friends gather around and somebody walks in and it's a total surprise. Tell us what an intervention is all about and why they're so important.
Well, I think they're important because I think families get stuck as to what to do and are so emotionally caught up in the situation where they make missteps. An interventionist can come in and kind of organize a situation to help the family address the problem without them getting overly emotional, or, you know, people are kind of shooting from the hip.
Or finger pointing.
And finger pointing.
Yeah.
You know, the bottom line for intervention really is that we want our loved one to get help. And what is the best way to do it? there are a couple of types of intervention. One is the one that you talked about, Paul, which is more the Johnson model, and then there's the invitational model.
The Johnson model is all family in the room, kind of, so to speak.
All family in the room.
Surprise.
The person doesn't necessarily know that there's an intervention. They open up the door,
Right.
and
Surprise.
all those folks are there.
Yeah.
The invitational model would be that I'm going to let that person that has the addiction problem know that, next weekend we're having a family meeting, and we'd like to invite you to that. Well, what's this meeting about? Well, we want to address some of the problems within our family. And so that person is not the only one focused on. The whole family system is focused on. And we want to look at the problems within the family. So it winds up being almost like family therapy. The addict doesn't necessarily feel
that he's being picked on.
singled out.
Yeah.
And, well, what are you going to be talking about, my drug problem or this, that, and the other? Well, yeah, that'll be a part of it. But there's some things going on in the family that we need to address. So we're going to be meeting Saturday at 3 o'clock. Well, I'm not going to come. Well, if you don't come, you're going to miss out. We're still going to have the meeting.
Now, in your practice, do you favor Johnson versus invitational one way or the other, or does it really depend upon your client?
It really depends upon the person, and it's not one size fits all. I worked with a family where they had kind of tried a Johnson model, and then they tried the Marchman Act to force this person into treatment,
Right.
and it didn't work. So I'm not going to go do the same thing. We're going to have the invitational model.
If you would just take one moment for the benefit of the audience that doesn't know what the Marchman Act is, if you could just give us the thumbnail.
Well, it's a legal procedure used to get someone, on some level, force them into getting help if they have a problem, if it's seen that they're going to be hurting themselves or someone else.
So it involves the court.
It involves the courts.
Okay.
Yeah.
The intervention itself, how long do they last? What typically comes out in those kind of discussions based upon some of the ones that you've done?
Well, one of the things that primarily comes out that kind of slays the beast is the love of family members, that they're able to express their love and concern about the person. And people have a tendency to have these secret loving thoughts and feelings that they don't necessarily talk about. And in the intervention, they're encouraged to do that. So that's one of the things that comes. And at times, it could leave the person defenseless. I can't defend this anymore. My family just loves me and wants to help me.
And all that time that I thought they didn't like me, and that gave me an excuse to drink or drug or whatever it may be,
Absolutely.
may have been my own misconception, even though I may not recognize or didn't recognize it at the time. But they really do care, so maybe it's time for me to do something about my problem.
And that's on a good day.
Yeah.
On the other side, screw this,
And
I'm not
walk out
doing
the
it,
door.
and walk out the door.
Right.
So, Michael, what would you like our listeners to take away from this? What are your final thoughts that...
I think what I'd like people to take away from this is that you don't have to do this on your own. That there are people who are willing to help you in this process, give you some advice, give you some direction. They could facilitate an intervention, facilitate a family meeting for you, but you don't have to do it alone. And you don't have to allow the shame to overtake your process. No one is alone. There are very few people here in the United States that are not affected by addiction. If you
You mean either directly or indirectly?
directly or indirectly, absolutely, yeah.
And let me ask this question. I guess for the last, 70, 80 years, the conventional method, especially early on, was the 12-step process. And that still seems to be very widely accepted as a way for people to either, get a sponsor, go and get help, etc. What are your feelings about that? Do you still, I mean, I know that you're doing intervention, you're bringing the family together many times, but I mean, how does 12-step fit into the interventional model?
Well, I mean, here's what I would say. In any kind of problem, if you know someone who's been successful in getting out of that problem, why not utilize what they used? Now, I don't know, you don't have to get so rigid. There's not one way to do it.
Okay.
But there's flexibility in the 12 steps. There's openness. So 12 steps is one way. But if somebody else can find another way that works, go
It's
for
not
it.
to the exclusion of one or the other.
No,
Sure.
no,
All right.
no.
So, on a more personal level, Michael, I know that you are an ultra marathoner.
What is an ultramarathon?
Yes, that's what I wanted you to
Okay.
explain to our listeners, some of the things that you've done.
So I am not an ultra marathoner. I have run an ultra marathon.
Okay.
So it's not
Okay.
like I'm doing that every weekend. But I had done a couple of marathons and was approached by an organization called the Run Well Foundation and asked me if I would do an ultra marathon. And an ultra marathon is a stage race where I ran a marathon a day for 4 days and then 58 miles on the 5th day through the Sahara Desert with all of my equipment on my back at 120 degrees. And within the first 18 miles, my feet swelled up so bad that I couldn't run with my sneakers anymore. So I did 137 miles in a pair of Tevas. But in that, the goal was really to raise money to help with awareness and destigmatize addiction. So I was able to raise $100,000
Wow.
for the Run Well
Awesome.
Foundation that helps to scholarship people into getting addiction treatment.
Wow, that's a heck of a way to raise money. I mean, I know people go for walks.
Talk about blisters.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow, you're to be commended. Just
And you know, the other thing that I'm very proud of, I've been able to inspire 7 other people to run in Egypt and in China the same race, and they were able to raise money to help people with addiction problems.
Is there a reason you have to go offshore that you can't do it in the Mojave?
Well, there is a race in California that's pretty tough.
Okay.
But I like the exotic. I like, if I'm going to go big.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, we're just about running out of time, David. Michael, you're going to be back in 2 weeks, and
Yes.
you're going to be bringing somebody with you. Can you sort of give us a preview?
What I'm going to do is I'm going to bring a person that is actually in recovery now that was intervened on, got into recovery, relapsed, and found his way back into recovery.
Wow.
And we're going to look at some of the dynamics that may have hindered his first recovery experience, what may have kept him out there using a little longer than he needed to, and what was it that took to get him back into recovery and stay this time.
Wow, that's quite a story. And for our audience, 2 weeks from tonight, you're going to hear it here. And
Live.
It's going to be real, live, and, the truth of the matter. And Michael's going to be here helping to guide that, facilitate it. And whoever his guest may be, who can remain anonymous, obviously, going to tell it like it is.
Yeah.
And I don't think you'll hear it anywhere else
Yeah.
but here.
Michael,
Yeah,
sorry.
go ahead.
Michael, how do people reach you if they want to speak to you, and what's the easiest way to get in touch with you?
You can go to my website, which is www.recoveryguide.net, or you can email me at recoveryguide@gmail.com.
All right. And is there a telephone number that you care to give out?
561-221-7677.
Repeat it.
561-221-7677. But it's easiest to catch me on the email address.
Okay. That's fair enough. Michael, you've been a wonderful guest. You've really added a whole dimension to the subject of addiction that certainly I wasn't aware of, and I want to thank you for being as candid and as articulate as you have been in explaining this, because I'm sure there are many, many people out there, just as there are in any other aspect of disease, that will benefit from what they've heard from you. Whether they can get to you, because we're broadcast everywhere, all right, is one thing. But I think it's safe to say that if they look for the proper professional to be able to go to and get that intervention and get that perspective, that there is a reasonable hope that there's recovery from an addiction.
Recovery is very possible, and there's hope out there.
Or well,
And people get better.
that's certainly for everybody that's dealing with it, kind of hidden behind the door. That's something very important to realize, is that it's not an end of the road desperation situation, even though it may have gotten bad. That there is a way back, and the right professional can help to guide that and bring everybody back into a better family dynamic, or whatever the circumstances may be.
Michael, I know you have another appointment that you have to get to, and you're on your way. I want to thank you so much for taking time to giving us so much insight into this very, very difficult topic, and we look forward to seeing you in 2 weeks.
I'm really looking forward to you back in 2 weeks, and
Thank
thank
you.
you so much for being here.
Okay,
Thank you.
thanks.
Next week, David, we're going to have another special guest that's coming in, and she's going to tell her story about her addict son, and it'll be from the perspective of a mother and a nurse, and this is someone who I know very, very well.
Yes, I know you do.
It's my bride.
Right.
Hopefully she's going to be well enough to join us.
Let's hope so. In the meantime, let's take a station break, and we'll be back. You're listening to us on CareGiverReality.com, on WWNN 1470, iHeartRadio, and AMP2 TV.
Are you a family caregiver? Are you taking care of a spouse or loved one who can no longer take care of himself or herself? Are you dealing with Alzheimer's disease and don't know what to do? Do you feel burned out, frustrated, and just don't know where to turn? You've tried doctors, lawyers, and mental health professionals and have come to realize that they don't have practical answers to these questions. What you need are experts, non-clinical family caregivers with 25 years of active experience helping thousands of family caregivers like yourself. People who can help you provide a better quality of life for yourself and your loved one. Who you need are David Levy or Paul Vadiato. Reach David at david@caregiverreality.com or reach Paul at caregiverreality.com and let them help you pick the right path towards improving the quality of life for you, the caregiver, and your loved one.
My name is Paul, and I am a spousal caregiver. I am one of 50 million caregivers just here in the United States alone. I keep my wife safe. I help maintain her dignity. I help give her the best quality of life possible, and above all, I am her advocate. Yes, there are times that I get angry, I become frustrated with the system, sometimes I feel resentment and I deal with guilt, and I know that I am not alone. When I need support, I turn to Caregiver Reality for help. My name is Paul Vadiato, and I am president of Caregiver Reality. Find us at www.caregiverreality.com. Help is a click away.
This is Caregiver Reality with gerontologist David Levy and caregiver expert Paul Vadiato, who ask you to call in and speak with him on the air toll-free at 888-565-1470. That's 888-565-1470 to share a story or important information. Now, back to today's Caregiver Reality Show.
Well, we're back, and I must tell you that was quite a story from Michael about running across the Sahara Desert in a pair of Tevas. 138 miles or whatever that distance was with a pack on his back. He sounds like he was in SEAL training. And I wonder whether they go that far.
Well, I didn't want to ask him at what age this happened, but whatever age, that's quite a feat.
I don't care. No matter what, that was quite an accomplishment.
Yes.
And to then do it in China and do it in other international locations, certainly I give him a lot of credit. And as a professional, I know, Paul, you've known him for quite a while.
Yes.
And he's got a wonderful reputation in the field, and I think he was very candid with us tonight, and I'm really looking forward to hearing him with one of his clients in 2 weeks. You know, this past week, the American Psychological Association posted on their website that family members of adults with substance abuse problems who are caregivers, that the profession itself has overlooked the family caregiver. You know, they've only kind of accepted them as possibly being an enabler or another member of the family. And one of the things that the APA is doing is they're about to undertake some more research, because they said there's been little to no research that's looked into the role of the unpaid family caregiver and the significant other inside of addiction issues. You know, this whole issue of unpaid family caregiver, which is the 50 to 60 million of you out there, and probably more if we could get an accurate count, there's very, very little recognition for what you do, the job you're trying to perform, your problems in the workplace, your problems socially, emotionally, the lack of understanding about where is all of this going, fighting with the system. It's just unbelievable. I had a phone call just before I came on the air from a client from a couple of years ago who called me back, who was in the throes of a lot of difficulty because one of the major healthcare organizations that has taken over the Medicaid managed situation has decided all of a sudden that the drugs that his mother was on are no longer in their formulary, which is their drug plan, because they're so expensive. And you know, while everybody has to make a dollar, and we certainly understand what's going on, he was beside himself because the treatment was, his mother is 89, and the treatment was for cancer. And he said, the doctor said, I'm going to have to do a mastectomy, remove the breast. And I said to him, why would you ever put an 89-year-old mother through that kind of surgery? How is she even going to recuperate and recover? I said you would be far wiser to call hospice, not because necessarily it's end of life, but under the palliative care that we heard Lisa Tartaglia a few weeks back, who was the hospice doctor, talk about the fact that you can still have pain-free dignity and maintain a regimen of care without taking you off the way traditional hospice does when it's now determined to be end of life. And he said, you mean I can do that? And I said, as long as she qualifies, and
Right.
It would certainly sound that an 89-year-old with breast cancer who can't survive a mastectomy would be a perfect candidate. And if the family felt that they still wanted to try and use some therapy, whatever this chemotherapy might be, that would not be excluded, assuming, of course, that the healthcare provider was willing to pay for it, because I don't know how, I don't think that, well, hospice will take care of you while the therapy is going on. I don't think that they're going to pay for that medication. But in any event, his mother will have dignity and whatever semblance of quality one can have while being pain-free and dealing with an organization that recognizes the predicament that she's in, the predicament that he's in, and try and help them out in a very difficult situation. And so I give a lot of credit to hospice, because they really are filling a gap that is so desperately needed, and people do not understand. And even when we had Dr. Tartaglia on a few weeks back, you know, she had her 20 minutes to explain. but I must tell you that she could have taken a couple of hours.
We could do shows on it.
We could do shows on it, and in the future we will. And I just want to repeat that to all of the men in our audience, all
Yes.
right, I'm really very, very pleased, not to the exclusion of women, but I'm really very pleased to see that kind of statistic, because I know from 27 years in the business of just doing this, how hard it is for men to recognize their role as a caregiver. And so I give you a lot of credit. I thank you for listening. And certainly Paul and I hope, are representative of the male caregiver for a spouse, or the male caregiver for anyone in the family for that matter. And as we go forward, I just trust that we'll be able to bring you the kind of information and the support that you need in recognizing you in this very important role. Paul?
Visit us on Facebook. Visit us on LinkedIn. Let us know your thoughts and where you want to go. Caregivers, take care of yourself. Have a great week, and thank you so much for joining us this afternoon.
And Florida, South Florida, America, and the world, we'll be back next Tuesday with the Caregiver Reality Hour, and we hope all of you will be able to join us. Until then, as Paul said, take care, and you're doing a great job.
Good night, everyone.
Thanks for joining us for this week's Caregiver Reality Show. Each week, David Levy, a gerontologist, and Paul Vadiato, a caregiver expert with a combined over 25 years of experience, providing practical and realistic help to caregivers struggling to keep up with the needs of a loved one who are unable to care for himself or herself. To reach David Levy, email him at david@caregiverreality.com. Or to reach Paul Vadiato, email paul@caregiverreality.com. And find out more online. Just go to caregiverreality.com. See you next week for another exciting show of Caregiver Reality. The opinions expressed on the preceding sponsored program were strictly those of its hosts, guests, and callers, and not necessarily those of the station, its staff, management, or sponsors.
Like most